Okay. Well, I have time. Chair Jay Hansen, I'm going to call the Construction Industry Energy Board meeting today on April 10th of 24 open and in order at 9:30 a.m. Katie, would you please call the roll call?
Yes, sir.
Call the roll.
Representing Mechanical Board, Chair Jay Hansen.
Present. Video by video.
Thank you. Representing Electrical and Elevator Board, Vice Chair Thomas Kyle.
Present in room.
Thank you. Representing Building Code Structures Board, Gary Heekin is absent, excused. Representing Electrical and Elevator Board, Ryan Richards.
Present on the video.
Thank you. Representing the Officer of the State of Department of Energy, Blake Schlide.
I'm here by video.
Thank you, Blake. Representing of Mechanical Board, Walter Caudle is also absent. Representing Residential and Manufactured Structures Board, Matthew Lutter.
Present.
Thank you. And representing State and Plumbing Board, Tyrone Bergen.
Here.
Thank you, Tyrone. And representing the State and Plumbing Board as well, Matthew Roselle. I just saw him pop on, so we might need to wait for him to connect. Oh.
I'm here. Thank you. Sorry I'm late. Technical difficulties.
Not a problem. Thank you. And yes, Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Moving on to the agenda. We have an agenda in front of us, and I'd like to ask if anybody has any agenda items that they would like to see, but that are not on the agenda. Do we have any input on the current agenda? Hearing none, I will rule that the agenda and order of business approved with the amendments of removing item 1G, welcoming our new member from the Residential and Manufactured Structure Board. So we have our order of business. Draft. Does anybody have any input on the draft meeting minutes from our last meeting of October 17th? Actually read that whole thing. That was a heck of a meeting. Anyone? Hearing none, I'll rule the draft minutes for the October 17th meeting of this committee as adopted. Our next meeting will be on June 11th of 2024. Same bat time, same bat channel. I would like to welcome our newest member from the State Plumbing Board, Tyrone Bergen. Is Tyrone on the call or present?
Present in person.
Present. Very good, Tyrone. Be careful, Mark. Mark can be a handful, okay? So just be aware. Sitting right next to Mark. That's Tyrone. We welcome Tyrone Bergen to the Construction Industry Energy Board. Tyrone was confirmed on September 29th, 2023 to the State Plumbing Board in the position of a local plumbing inspector who is a journeyman plumber. His term began on October 5th, 2023, and he will continue to serve until his first 4-year is up October 4th, 2027. Put that in your calendar, Tyrone, because they'll suck you in and keep you if you don't remind them. Then allow Tyrone to say something about himself. Okay, Tyrone, would you introduce yourself a little further?
Yes, good morning. Feel like I recognize a few of the faces. Some I haven't met in person, some by email. But yeah, I definitely appreciate the opportunity to be here and learn from each of you. Plumbing definitely is my background, my sweet spot, if you will, my comfort zone. But I'm also a multi-hatted inspector, so happy to learn. So, and look forward to this meeting today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tyrone. Chair Hansen will ask policy and analyst Patrick Sabat, Pierre, would you address the general public comment item?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. For the record, not Patrick. My name is Pierre Sabat, policy analyst with the division. We don't have any requests for public comment today. We will hold the line open for a moment if there's anyone that's virtual that didn't sign up that would like to provide general public comment to the board.
Okay.
Seeing and hearing none, that concludes general public comment. Thank you, Chair Hansen.
All right. Now we move on to Chief Heizer. Would you please discuss what has been happening within the program?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Mark Heizer with the division, mechanical and energy engineer. At this time, we'd like to give an energy program update of what's been happening in the division. First, we would like to introduce our latest new employee who has joined us in the energy team, Ann Geyer. She joins us from the sustainability consulting industry. She also has additional background in home energy assessments and environmental reports. She's here to, Ann's been added to provide assistance and being the direct contact, really helping put together reports that are required under House Bill 3409 when we're looking at embodied carbon impacts. Ann will be back with us probably at the next meeting or a future one, giving an update on where we are with our report that is required under 3409 to be given to the legislature. Other items that we have new, or of course we're rolling out the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code, of course, for 1 and 2 family homes is now fully in force. We have code change training for building officials, some nice videos that are available, whether it's, and the Chapter 11 energy provisions are in there. We also are working on some additional intake and inspection training presentations for our staff, for building officials around the state. One item that should be noted is that there are some editorial errata that will be issued soon for the 2023 ORRC, just as part of the publication process. Some things get lost in the mail, and be looking for that to be issued soon. We continue to do outreach of tracking what's happening at the national code level, also with other states, especially the ones that are bordering us, what's happening in their energy codes, working with different organizations on federal grants that might provide additional support for helping make sure that we get training out for both building officials and those using energy codes. At this time, there's an additional program update that I'd like to invite Todd Smith forward to give some additional pieces of information.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, Chair Hansen, members of the board. For the record, Todd Smith, Policy and Technical Services Manager here for the division. I did want to share some additional updates. That it's breaking news. As of Monday, Tony Rocco, our structural chief, was named the new manager of our housing and building safety section. HABS is going to be our point of contact to implement the HAPO that was created last session, and we'll be working with Department of Land Conservation and Development to put that together, to have our joint office that will be the HAPO. The big news there is that 1, congratulations to Tony, and 2, nothing from our end is going to change in terms of our service levels. It'll be a single point of contact for developers, cities, counties, whoever wants to have questions on how to do housing production. There's no wrong door. You can call us. We'll get you over to the land use people if we need to. You can call them. They'll get you over to us if they need to. But our service levels won't be changing, but we're going to be asking our boards to help us implement this and make sure it's a successful program. I'm happy to answer any questions. All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Mark, we're moving on to the discussion of the 2023 Oregon Residential Reach Code, I believe.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Once again, Mark Heizer with the division with a communication item IV.A that you're finding in your packet. It is about the 2023 Oregon Residential Reach Code. The work has been completed and the work was approved at the April 3rd Residential and Manufactured Structures Board meeting. The adoption process, we wound up with up to 7 or more potential compliance paths that were looked at and reviewed for potentially bringing in to the Residential Reach Code. We narrowed the number of paths down to 3 using either the US EPA Energy Star Home Compliance Path, the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home Compliance Path, or the Passive House US 2021 path. The simplification was able to tie any of these above code programs to federal 45L incentives. So any builder selecting to go with the REACH code has the ability to get direct federal incentive money ranging from $2,500 to $5,000 depending on the path. And then of course there are potentials for overlay of incentives from the Energy Trust of Oregon residential programs should you be in their working area. With that, I'm available for any questions if you have any over the residential REACH code.
Any questions? All right, moving right along. Another informational piece, Chief Heizer will discuss interpretation 2302.
Thank you again, Chair Hansen. Mark Heizer with the division. Wanted to make people aware of interpretation 2302 regarding condensate from heat pump water heaters. We had been receiving a bit of feedback from the field on what was happening with the disposal of condensate from heat pump water heaters, potential of the lines freezing, and of course the heat pump operation not being able to work. Looking to assistance from the national model codes. Not much is available now because the condensate drain language is really relative to what was coming out of a cooling coil in the middle of summer, and so the freezing applications mostly rely on the manufacturer's installation instructions. The interpretation provides some guidance for clear application of what would be a location where potentially freeze protection might be required for the condensate drain line. I'd be happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions?
I would just Thomas comment.
Okay, Chief Heizer, you're still up
Yeah.
for a informational discussion on the state alternate method 2401.
We do have one question.
I had a question. It says that the cold climate apparently doesn't affect the coast, but how far inland? Is there a map or something that shows what activated?
Okay, we cannot hear that question. Do you have a mic on?
The mic is on.
Better, yeah.
Let's try again.
Okay. The
Better.
criteria says it doesn't affect the coastal, but how far inland does the coast go with this rule?
Thank you for the question, Mark Heizer with the division. It would be so in the residential code, there are design temperatures for the air conditioning system, so it's tied really to the city or town that you're in. So probably more than 10 or 15 miles inland, depending on the elevation, again, on the coast, so some are still down at low elevation and will be above freezing. Higher elevations most likely might require it. So, and that would really apply to the disposal location if you're taking the condensate directly out of sidewall, would be where that would be affected. So most locations probably will be easier just to find an interior location to dispose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing and seeing none, we will now move on to talk about, Chief Heizer also has an informational piece on the state alternate method 2401.
Again, item C under communications, Mark Heizer with the division once again to discuss statewide alternate method 24-01. There were some requests from locations in the state that are closer to states that are under the IECC for their residential energy compliance, and due to equivalency between the two codes, we have a statewide alternate method that allows the use of the 2021 IECC for homes built under, or dwellings built under the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, to be able to use the IECC as an alternate path for those who aren't used to where you may have a builder coming in from out of state who's more familiar with the IECC path. So that is an additional methodology that's available to residential contractors.
Excellent. Good. Moving on to item 4D. Chief Heizer, would you present the informational Northwest Power and Conservation Council's power plan and preparation document? I'm interested in this.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Mark Heizer with the division. This was something we put into the packet as sort of a lead-in to the next communication item on a presentation on energy planning. There was a question on, a general question from this board about electric capacity, what's being planned, how that takes place. This document is included to show how, from a regional power grid standpoint, how they are about to prepare their 9th power plan of sort of what's the capacity, where are things happening. This is a public document that sort of says, for people who are wishing to provide input, how that works. We decided to include it because on page 4 of the document, there's a fairly interesting flow diagram of how they come to their look at where do we need resources? Do we have enough resources? Do they need extra power lines, et cetera? This is how their process works. Just including that as sort of a general intro to some of the many steps that are involved in looking at the future power grid availability. So just wanted to have that as informational for everyone before we move to the next communication item.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We'll move on to item 4E, energy strategy and planning. And do we have Meredith Connolly from Climate Solutions to discuss the energy strategy and planning? Is Meredith with us?
I am. Hi, Jay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello,
Great.
Meredith. Welcome to our fun committee.
It sounds like fun.
It is.
I was learning about condensation and heat pump water heaters, so I enjoyed it. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And a few others have also generously given their time. We were asked to provide, given all you work on the building side of energy, to provide kind of an insight into the other side of the energy world on the planning and load and how these all fit together and what we're looking at on the time horizon here for Oregon as we meet climate goals and other forces. So we've prepared some slides, and I'll introduce, before I put that up, I'll introduce everyone else who's going to be talking through all this. So I'm Meredith Connolly. I'm the Oregon Director of Climate Solutions. We are a regional nonprofit working on clean energy solutions to the climate crisis. and I lead a team working on in the regulatory and legislative space here in Oregon on electricity, transportation systems, and buildings. And I will pass it to Edith to introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Edith Bayer. I'm Energy Policy Team Lead at the Oregon Department of Energy. And for practical purposes, what that means for the next year and a half is that I'm leading work on developing an energy strategy, looking at how we pathways to achieve our decarbonization goals and what the trade-offs of different pathways would be and what that would look like. And we're in the very early stages, so it's a really good time to be having this conversation. Great to meet you all.
Welcome.
Franco, do you want to introduce yourself?
Make sure I'm not on mute. Good morning, everybody. Franco Albi from Portland General Electric. My title is Director of Regional Integration, which really means I'm working on optimizing and maximizing the use of our existing system, working with customers to increase the flexibility of their load, make sure things like electric vehicles and solar panels are all connected in a way that allows us to use every megawatt, and starting with the energy efficiency aspects, make sure that we don't need to generate megawatts if we can otherwise manage the system effectively. So excited to get a few minutes to talk with the team today, and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. And Alex, do you want to round us out?
Hello, Chair Hansen and members of the board. My name is Alex Birdsell. I'm head of residential innovations at Earth Advantage. So my focus is on providing resources for design teams and contractors to respond to the current needs in the building industry and energy demands. That includes specifically how envelope and mechanical systems can cooperate, and understanding buildings and homes as a system, again, to provide comfort and safety for the occupants.
Great, thank you. So as you can see, with all these folks with so much rich experience, I figured we will get through a few slides to share some information with you, but then would love to have a discussion or answer any questions on the power planning side and demystify or discuss issues and solutions there. So I'll see if I can just share my screen. Will it let me? All right, let's see. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is a little more of a, I was hoping to make it a little more of a PowerPoint style for you, but that's okay. We'll just slide through the PDFs. All right. Well, here's a little overview of what we'll talk to you about today. I'll just briefly remind you of some of the 2023 buildings related legislation that we know you all have been interacting with and working on. And Jay, you were on the same task force with a lot of us kind of discussing these before the legislation went through. And then turn to Edith to talk about our energy planning and the energy strategy being developed. And then turn to Franco to talk about at a utility level, the planning and technologies, and then have a discussion. So briefly, why climate solutions and the legislature are really focused on buildings among other sectors is transportation and buildings make up our two biggest sectors of climate pollution. Obviously for buildings, it's really about how much of it is about using energy, both electricity and the natural gas coming into it. It makes up the lion's share of the pollution attributed to buildings in Oregon. These are 2020 numbers from the Department of Environmental Quality, but there's a lag on emissions being reported and then where they go, but our building sector emissions continue to trend upwards. And we just heard from DEQ that it's looking like even in 2023, our residential and commercial building sector emissions continue to trend upwards, largely from the increased use of natural gas. We do have a suite of policies to start to bend the curve on our climate pollution. and accelerate the transition there. There's requirements to transition to zero emission vehicles. There's a lot of infrastructure being built out for charging there. There's a clean fuels program requiring decarbonizing those transportation fuels. We have 100% clean electricity requirement that will, over the next couple decades, transition our electric grid to 100% clean. There's a requirement that it's 80% carbon free by 2030. So that is coming up, and Franco can talk more about those plans. And then there's a climate protection program that also requires our oil and gas companies to cut their climate pollution up to 90% by 2050. That is on pause right now, but DEQ is going through the process to reinstate that program by the end of this year. And then, of course, there's the Inflation Reduction Act, and other federal investments have put a wealth of money and rebates and incentives into this, including into the building sector, both at the commercial and residential level. Everything from energy efficiency to heat pumps to solar panels, electric vehicles, and more. And then there is what we touches most directly with the CIEB, which is this what passed in 2023, and I will get into, of the resilient efficient buildings package. And the reason to focus on homes and buildings, in addition to it being the second largest source of climate pollution in Oregon, of course, we all know that this is also our first line of defense against climate harms. We have more extreme heat. We have more other extreme temperatures. We have wildfires, a lot more wildfire smoke. This is how you protect people. And so really being able to focus on improving the quality of the building envelope, the energy efficiency, how we power our buildings, really helps with energy bills, improving air quality, as well as cutting pollution. So I won't get into the details of all these bills. I know you've talked about them before, but I was asked to just do a quick reminder. There was a package of the machinations of the 2023 session meant there were separate bills, and you see some of those bill numbers here, and then it was all folded into, if you want to go look back at it now, it's all in House Bill 3409, which is where all those bills ended up at the end of session. It did everything from set a heat pump goal for the state of 500,000 heat pumps by 2030, and creating a one-stop shop and trying to fold together and simplify all of the incentives and rebates to achieve some of those goals and make it easier for people to navigate. Most closely, and I'll have one more slide diving in on this, it codified the Executive Order 2004 from Governor Brown about energy efficiency targets for our new codes, and also incorporated our state climate goals into those codes, and what the Building Codes Division is trying to achieve, along with every other state agency, of achieving our overall climate goals. It created a statewide building performance standard for commercial buildings that's being implemented by the Department of Energy now. And then there are some barriers specific to state buildings, and this helped remove some of those barriers so that they can make deeper energy efficiency upgrades. More specifically, this is just a quick deeper dive on some of the pieces of what the section of HB 3409 on the new codes division directed BCD to do. And then one thing we're going to be talking about is, how does this all fit together with the energy system we have, and how do we plan for all those things? There is a challenge coming up in Oregon with load growth, and I know Edith and Franco are prepared to talk more about that. I just wanted to give a picture from all three of our major, PacifiCorp and PG make up 2/3 of our sources of electricity, and then BPA provides the hydropower and electricity mix for the consumer-owned utilities that make up the other 1/3 of Oregon's electricity sources. And they are all seeing major load growth. The top driving reason for that is actually data centers. We have about 30 data centers in Oregon. We have 10 to 20 more in the queue already. With the entry of AI, they are using even more energy than before, and each one can use as much as a small city in Oregon. So that is a big area of load growth for Oregon. Some is in BPA territory, others is in PacifiCorp PG territory. We also semiconductors, other manufacturing is being incentivized and growing. And then, of course, there is electrification also coming onto the system. The load growth is primarily from transportation, but also some from building electrification projected as well. So here is some of the, as you can see for BPA, this is just the data center load growth that they see. And now I'll turn to others to talk about how Oregon is planning for all of that, and it interacts with the building sector. So Edith, if you want to just tell me when to advance slides.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, and you can skip the first two. They're sort of our cover slide and about the Oregon Department of Energy. Happy to answer questions if you have questions about us, but I think you all are familiar with us. So just kind of to frame up this presentation, which is going to be brief, we're at the beginning of the process of developing a state energy strategy. And what that will be doing is looking at pathways to meeting our state's energy policy objectives. We just saw some of the legislation and regulations that are driving those the goals that we have in place, or setting those goals. We'll be looking out to 2050. And really the energy strategy, the way that I think about it, it starts and ends with demand, with demand for energy in transportation, in buildings, in industrial sectors. All of this demand has a key role in driving the need for energy and how much energy we need and when we need it. But also a lot of the solutions come down to solutions that can happen on the demand side, things like end use energy efficiency, demand side flexibility. This is all becoming increasingly important. So I think it's great to be talking to you all today who are really focused on buildings and energy. The energy strategy will include a technical and a policy analysis and involve a lot of stakeholder engagement. We really want to make sure that both kind of on the technical side and more broadly, we're engaging with experts and with stakeholders and with tribes across the state to inform the process. And I don't have a bunch of slides about the energy strategy because we're the very start of that process. After this presentation, I'm going to paste in to the chat a link to the web page that we have on ODOE's website where you can sign up for email updates, because we will be starting to engage more deeply, and we'll be interested in understanding whether any of you might be interested in engaging in that process, probably around mid-June. That's my guess, as we're in the process of getting consultants on board. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is just give a snapshot of some of how ODOE tracks where we are with energy today, and that this is kind of a partial view of a more robust analysis we'll be doing in the energy strategy. So this first slide looks at consumption, energy consumption, total energy consumption over time. And also per capita. And what's interesting here is that you can see there's kind of this steady growth from 1960 to about 2000, the year 2000 on total energy consumption, which is that navy blue, kind of that darker line. And then total energy consumption starts to decline gradually. And that's at the same time that we continue to have population growth and our GDP continues to grow. And a lot of that is driven by the energy efficiency programs and policies that we have in place in Oregon. And you can see that energy consumption per capita has actually declined more quickly than total energy consumption. And that's what's helping to drive down overall energy consumption. Essentially, we're getting more efficient. And one of the things that we've seen when we look at other energy strategies and other decarbonization studies is that energy efficiency is one of the key areas of activity that needs to happen if we're to kind of cost effectively and in a timely manner decarbonize our energy systems. If we go to the next slide, another area that is a focus in all of these studies that we've looked at is electrification of end uses. So we hear a lot about heat pumps, electrifying space heating and water heating, and also electric vehicles. So we have an electric vehicles dashboard on our website, and this is the latest data that we have. It always takes a few months to process the data, so most recent here is September of last year. And as you can see, we have almost 79,000 EVs, or had in September. We've exceeded that number now. This includes both battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. That's the BEV, PHEV up there. And there's a map here by county, so you can see the concentration of vehicles in each county. And we also track the zero emission vehicle ownership by income and by county. So you can see a bit of the income distribution of kind of who's owning these vehicles. And it gives us a sense of how we're doing on equitable distribution and access to vehicles. And if you go on the website, you can also see there's a charging map as well, showing where the chargers are. So, so electric vehicle ownership is growing, and that's great, but it raises questions about what that means for the grid. And if we go to the next slide, we recently published our biennial zero emission vehicle report, and we asked some key questions. If you don't mind going to the next slide, we asked some key questions in that report about what the increase in electric vehicles means for Oregon from a few perspectives. We looked at the impact of load growth from electrification of vehicles on peak electricity demand, and how that ties in with other major electrification trends and other load growth that we're seeing, such as data centers that have already been mentioned. We looked at what the impact is on localized peak loads. So there's kind of the system impact, and then there's the impact kind of on a smaller scale. And then we looked at policies and programs that utilities use to manage and mitigate the effects of transportation electrification. And the key takeaways were really interesting. We looked out about 5 years, and we looked, among other things, at PGE's IRP and other integrated resource plans to get a sense of this. And we saw that electric vehicles on the whole in Oregon and the broader Western grid are not expected to be a driver of resource adequacy issues over the next 5 years. And in fact, energy efficiency and conservation programs are saving much more electricity than electric vehicles and electric heating seem to be adding to the system in the near term. Grid impacts, there are some localized grid impacts associated with increased loads from electric vehicles. Most often those are coming from larger loads from medium and heavy duty vehicles, which just have a bigger draw at a specific point where they're plugging in. And utility programs, there is experience with utility programs, and utility programs continue to develop this. Franco might talk a bit about this, to mitigate the effects of EVs on the grid. It's not just how many you have, it's how you use them. And that's really important. If we go to the next slide, another area that's really important when you look at kind of grid decarbonization pathways and work that's been done around the country and in the region is shifting to clean sources of energy, from fossil fuels to clean sources of energy. I mean, this is just one technology, but we have a PV dashboard on our website where we track PV over time. And I'm going to fly through these slides. So this is 1992, where you see just a smattering of residential solar projects. And then if you fast forward to 2012, you see that residential projects are really gaining traction. And you see the first utility scale solar projects appear in turquoise down there on the bottom right. And then by 2022, they're all over the map. So we have seen really tremendous growth in PV, both distributed and utility scale, and we expect to see more growth. I just want to point out, because this map can freak people out if they think, if I don't explain that the bubbles do not represent the land area that's being taken up, they represent the installed capacity. They just show the, how much electricity we're generating here, or how much capacity we have. So next slide. Again, this is really just kind of food for thought rather than a comprehensive view, because that's what we'll be doing in the energy strategy. But we recently published an Oregon cooling needs study that was a direct response from the legislature to the heat dome of 2021 that caused quite a few heat-related deaths, many of which were preventable. And so ODOE was charged with looking at the need for cooling and access to cooling in the most vulnerable types of housing. So we looked at manufactured and mobile homes, we looked at publicly supported multifamily housing, and we looked at residential RVs, and found that there is a really serious need here to expand access to cooling. And this is a necessary area of load growth. I mean, this is really just a fundamental need. And it's not related to our climate goals. It is related to changes that we're seeing in our climate to increase temperatures. And you can see here, kind of, we identified an immediate need and a longer term need. And there's quite a high cost here, and there's an impact on the grid as well. But I think that it's just important to keep in mind that we're not just talking, even in the energy strategy, we're not just talking about how we meet our climate goals. We're looking at the big picture, and we're looking at how those other needs also need to be met, and how we address the whole. And there are QR codes. We'll share this presentation, I think, afterwards, and you can all check out our well, you can actually take a snapshot of the QR codes as I'm going through if you want to look at these, and we'll also share the presentations afterwards. And the last slide that I have is one that just summarizes the incentive programs that ODOE is involved in administering. And I just wanted to point this out because there's a programmatic side here too, and a kind of a side where we're supporting implementation of some of these technologies, some of these solutions, trying to match available funding with needs. And so I just thought that I would present this slide so that you could see the types of programs that ODOE is involved in. We have the Oregon Solar and Storage Rebate Program, Wildfire Rebuilding Incentive, Heat Pump Incentive Programs, Community Renewable Energy Grant Program, Oregon Rural and Agricultural Energy Assistance Program, Grid Resilience, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. So there's quite a lot happening in this space as well. And one of the things that we'll be looking at in the energy strategy is not just pathways to achieving our goals, but where some of the gaps are. We already have a pretty robust framework. There's a lot already happening. And so where are the gaps? Where are the needs, both to meet our climate goals, but also to meet some of the concerns over equity and access to the opportunities that the energy transition can offer. So I think I'm going to end there and hand it over to Franco, but happy to answer questions afterwards. And again, I'll post the link to our energy strategy webpage in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, or good morning again, everybody. I'm excited to get through the day, so it's afternoon popped into my head. Just listening to Meredith and Edith, it's a lot of information coming at you. I'm going to try to kind of simplify and acknowledge that, I'm in the weeds of this stuff every single day. So if I start using acronyms or anything needs clarification, please raise your hand and ask and kind of slow me down. The other thing I'll mention before we jump into looking at the slides, my background's in civil engineering. So I really appreciate the operability of everything that we're talking about. We see, kind of long-term growth trends and the planning, and that's really important. And what we need to be able to do is have a system that meets the needs of our customers with a level of confidence that, they're not worried about their power going out. They're not worried about, if I plug in my electric vehicle, is that going to be an issue? We don't see those as issues, but again, with that engineering headset, we've got to make sure that we're connecting the long-term planning horizons to the day-to-day operability of everything that we're talking about. And while we kind of point to electric vehicles or solar panels, we also look at this as an ecosystem. All of those things are working together or can work together. And that's really a big focus for ours. We call it, integration, not just mitigating new things coming onto the grid, but having those things actually operate, in harmony with being able to be orchestrated with the rest of the ecosystem. And a couple of data points, Meredith mentioned data centers are driving a lot of the growth forecasts. Data centers are us. So from 2010 to 2020, there's about a 6,000% increase in household data usage. Now that's not one-for-one increase in kilowatts used, but the reason they're building so many data centers is because we're generating the need for that information, and it's our usage. The other exciting driver is semiconductor manufacturing, and we're fortunate to have Intel in our service territory, and they've committed to spending tens of billions of dollars to expand their facility, which is going to be a fantastic economic driver for us. We're also uniquely situated in the country based on high volume, high capacity fiber terminals coming into the Hillsborough area. There's one on the West Coast, it's us. There's one on the East Coast in Virginia. And when we look at that data center growth, globally, it's expected to double between 2023 and 2030. And half of that growth is expected to be in the US. And a big chunk of that half is expected to be in the Portland area, Oregon service territory, and in that Virginia area. So everything that we were looking at, 5, 6, 7 years ago in terms of electrification really has been amplified with the additional energy needs from data centers and from the semiconductor manufacturing industry and automation that's happening within those. So Meredith, you can move us to the next slide. What this is we call it a heat map. On the columns across, you see the months of the year, and then hours of the day are on the rows on that vertical. And this is an annual average look. So every day is different depending on if it's sunny, if it's windy, depending on the conditions. This heat map will kind of fluctuate. But the takeaway here is that as we look at the years, in the middle of the summer, kind of that 6, 7, 8 o'clock time period is when we see a forecast for need of energy. When we have the gray areas, that's typically lower usage, lower customer usage, and availability of things like wind and hydro. And what's interesting about this too is that the time of need doesn't necessarily track with the time that the sun goes across the sky. So when we look at this, this is not a cause for concern. This is a cause for linking our planning to the types of resources that we are integrating into the system, and then also thinking about how we use energy effectively. And for me, the cleanest megawatt is the one we don't have to generate. The most efficient megawatt is the one we don't have to generate. So if we start from that perspective, it's why the buildings are so important and those building envelopes are so important. That helps us upstream and manage the energy needs. And if you go to the next slide, this just kind of is the top line takeaway of that heat map. In 2022, in the wintertime, in December, we experienced our all-time winter peak load of just over 4,000 megawatts. And then in summer of 23, we experienced our all-time summer peak load. So a takeaway here is we used to be winter peaking for the longest time. We didn't have significant air conditioning penetration. We had pretty mild summers, but over the last 7 to 10 years, we've seen this more dual peaking phenomenon, and it's happening more and more frequently. December 22, August 23, and we actually would have seen an all-time winter peak in January of 24. If you remember, we had 4 or 5 days when it was like 15 degrees, extremely cold. But we also had a lot of wind and ice. So trees came down. We lost power over 9 days to about 500,000 customers. So unfortunately, we weren't able to provide them power. Had we been able to, we would have seen our all-time peak winter load there. So this is something that is happening on an increasingly frequent basis. And everything that we're doing with our long-term planning and thinking about how we integrate these resources is geared to managing these peaks and optimizing the use of our system. So if you go to the next slide, I'll kind of walk us through this chart. It works better with animation, but I think we can make it happen with what we've got here. If you look at the light blue line, which is the curve that goes to the highest part of the graph, this is set from an actual day, from that August 16th day in 2023, where we had our peak load about 4,500 megawatts. This is what we would call the unmitigated load. People, living their lives the way they always have, plugging in electric vehicles like they're a toaster, using them whenever they want, not necessarily paying attention to charging times or anything like that. And today we have customers that are signed up for various programs, whether they're peak time rebate programs, which is like thermostats. If they're on electric vehicle charging programs, there's times of day when they would charge based on a rate signal. And what we're able to do with that today is that red line up there, that customer action component. We activated all the programs. On this day in particular, we actually requested all of our customers do as much conservation as they could. And that had an impact of about 90 megawatts, which is about 2% of the load for that day. So pretty significant ability to shift energy use just based on that kind of direct customer participation. But what's interesting as well, if you start to move your eye towards that noon window and the two blue lines that are kind of stacked on top of each other, there was a significant amount of solar generation on our system. It just showed up in a non-coincident time with that peak load. And the lighter blue line, just for rough numbers, was about 425 megawatts. So if the 90 megawatts was a couple of percent, that 425 was nearly 10% of the peak time load. So if we're able to capture that solar in a time when the need isn't as high and store it into batteries, and then we can release that energy in that peak window, we're doing a couple of things. We're basically taking low cost energy and injecting it into a time when buying energy would have been a high cost. We are optimizing or increasing the utilization of the existing infrastructure. So by lowering that overall peak, we don't have to build new poles and wires. So we're really making the best of all of the components of that ecosystem. And what's really been fascinating about this and exciting about it is this convergence of the need, with the energy growth and the transition to the clean energy future, and the technology, the capability to do this didn't exist 20 years ago. The amount of visibility that you need into the devices is very high. The sensors that are now in everything that we own, the cost of those have come down significantly, and we're able to utilize that information to help orchestrate this. So what you see on the bottom, the three principles of acceleration, we call them, accelerating to an operable, reliable, clean energy future, is use every megawatt. We have a lot of solar on our system, and the last thing that we want to do is miss the opportunity to use that clean energy to support customers' needs. So curtailment has to be a last resort. We have to think about how are we going to use every megawatt. In order to do that, we have to be able to flow energy, quote unquote, the other way. Generation now showing up on the distribution system needs to be able to go from there to wherever that load is. If it's that house, if it's the neighbor's house, if it's across the development, if it's across the city, across the service territory, we want to be able to orchestrate that. And then the flex the flow component is really about, how do we send the right signals? How do we compensate folks for the energy that they're generating? And how do we manage that flow based on the system and ecosystem conditions? The solar eclipse was a fascinating one. If you looked at any of these charts, there was a dip right when that solar came over, when that eclipse happened, and just being able to know that that's coming, forecast it. Grid operators are kind of gritting their teeth, but they're able to plan for it. That's the type of stuff that we can do nowadays with the technology that we have, where we were less able to flex with the system needs previously. So those are the main things that I wanted to touch on. And again, I know we're throwing a lot of information at you, and I 4 years in, I still hate these kind of Zoom Teams calls because it feels very one way. But would love to answer any questions, and please know that we're available for follow-up as needed.
Blake, I have a question. Nice to see you again, but I have a question. The batteries, you mentioned the storage, and obviously batteries are the thing that come up. Can you talk a little bit about the technology, the development of batteries? I mean, are they the impact of creating the batteries and then replacing the batteries eventually? And how's that been taken into account with this view?
Great question, Chair Hansen. Was that a question for me or for Blake?
I'm sorry, you, not Blake. I had just looked at Blake on the screen. It's for you. I apologize.
No, perfect. That wanted to confirm. Yeah, I think the technology within batteries has been evolving rapidly. The costs have come down significantly. Much like the cost for solar panels have come down. There was an attempt to reduce the cost of solar by tenfold, and it seemed at the time impossible. And we have not only achieved that, we've exceeded that. We're seeing that same kind of curve with batteries. To your question on kind of the life cycle, a lot of the batteries right now are lithium based, and mining lithium has an impact. Much like we talk about energy efficiency, we also talk about round trip efficiency for these batteries, which means how are we optimizing the power density? How are we thinking about the recycling on the back end? And how do we think about repowering so that we're getting the maximum efficiency out of them? We're also looking at scale. If you go from electric vehicle battery size to power walls, so to speak, in your home, to what would be connected on the distribution system, to what would be connected on the transmission system. As you get bigger in scale, there's different technologies that become available. So we're seeing a lot more development beyond lithium, whether it's flow batteries or iron oxide batteries. And then the next evolution is the duration. Right now, 4 to 6 hours is really the sweet spot for batteries. When we're talking about 4 or 5 days in a row with 100+ degree temperatures or below freezing temperatures, 4 hours is helpful, but what we really need are days at a time. And so looking at long duration batteries is that kind of next component of the technical evolution. But yeah, definitely thinking about the whole life cycle, not only cost, but impact of the technology. And we do that for all the technologies, whether it's, wind farms and the fiberglass turbine blades, there's recycling programs for those. Basically anything has an impact. So we want to minimize that across the board.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Chair Hansen, we have a hand up. Is that Alex? Are you?
I don't get to see that. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. I just wanted to add that there's also maybe, so what we're really talking about is load shifting, right? Like Franco was pointing out, like that, energy demand and generation not always happening at the same time. And at least on a daily level, there's maybe some unexpected opportunities too, which are heat pump water heaters, right? Or water heaters in general that store thermal energy. So heat pump water heaters benefit from larger storage capacity and have an opportunity to also actually load shift 4 to 6 hours, or depending on sizing, even 9 hours, right? So as we're, if electrification is a focus, we have an opportunity to have like a fairly low cost opportunity to load shift as well, which also benefits then, utility bills and building occupants as well. Just wanted to make that up.
Thank you.
Yeah. Through the chair, Hansen, and this is to anybody, but is there any thought about looking at the demand cost?
Can't hear you. We can't hear you too well.
Okay. Is there any thought about looking at the demand costs to prevent, I guess, when you pull a lot of demand off of through your meter, a lot of facilities are forcing or adding a lot of money to that charge. I know that Newport is about $6 a kW. So if you do a 11 kW car chargers, that's $66 for your bill that month. Is there anything limiting that from residential use if we're going to go to all electric?
Franco, do you want to, that's a good question. I think, time of use rates and others are certainly, do you want to talk about just PGE, how you're looking at that?
Yeah, and it's try to not make it a complex answer to a complex question. I'm gonna start with the engineering answer, which is, we would love to match the cost and the value to the causation. I think where that becomes a challenge is that most customers do not want to be energy traders. So dynamic pricing, real-time pricing is not where customers want to be. And the kind of flat kind of postage stamp rates 24/7 that we've become accustomed to also don't reflect the costs on the system. And then that ends up having, some customers bear more of the costs than they otherwise should. So as we think about the time of use rates, we want to make sure that we're providing visibility for customers to make choices that make sense and help them use their energy in the way that they can still get what they need out of it, and in some cases can even make money off of how they use it, but not underappreciate the impact of electrification. We also think about it as, we call it shared energy economy or total energy wallet. As your electricity use goes up, your electricity bill is going to go up. But depending on what you're offsetting, your other bills might be going down. And the easiest one to point to is if you buy an electric vehicle and you're charging your car at your house, that electric bill goes up, but you're not spending any money at the gas pump. There's other benefits as well, as far as maintenance on the cars, et cetera. And so as we look at quote unquote rate design, customer price impacts, we're thinking about all of those considerations. The other one that's kind of sticky, and I think it's worth mentioning, is there is some flexibility in the way people use energy, but not everybody has that same flexibility. So Edith mentioned a couple of times energy equity. And so that's a component of how we think about the design as well. What looks good from kind of an economic analysis standpoint may not match what is happening with the whole system.
And I think one example of that, looking at EVs, we have a lot of nighttime wind. And so being able to shift folks to plug their EV in, but with new technologies, this kind of, they call it V-to-G, like vehicle to grid technologies you can control. We're not going to have it start charging right when you come home, plug it in. We're going to start having it actually pull energy and charge in the middle of the night when we have this peak wind that most people are not using because there isn't high demand. And so you can kind of shift some of the load with some of these smart technologies as well that maybe match up with time of use rates or otherwise kind of inspire people to do it at the times that it's cheapest for the grid and for everyone.
You gotta be careful. You got to be really careful with some of those things. I mean, if I come home and I got very little battery in my car, and the smartness of the system adjusts when it gets charged, and my wife goes into labor at 8 o'clock at night, and I'm not able to drive her because I'm a single vehicle owner. I'm not able to drive her to the hospital because the system isn't going to give me any power until a particular time. Be real careful with that.
Yeah. Well, and you can override it for sure. I have one of those Nests, and I'm part of the PG Smart. I forget the official name, Franco, but it allows, I give PG permission to shave a degree or two off of our air conditioning. Now we have a heat pump, but it just enables them to control it by a little, to load shift a little, but I can override it at any time. So sometimes, it's a really hot day and my kids are trying to go to bed and they're upstairs and I'm like, nope, sorry, PG, today I need I need the cold air.
All right.
So yeah.
One of the principles that we operate to is that the customers control the dial. So you have the choice and the control, and you may decide one day I'm going to give you 100% of my battery, and you have the control for that. But you may decide, you know what, I've got, my kid or my grandkid is getting ready to go into labor, and I want to be able to go to the hospital and be there when the kid is born, and I don't want to wait until 5 a.m. for my battery to be fully charged. So you can make that adjustment. But yeah, Chair Hansen, I think that's really important. At the end of the day, with that engineering background, what we're talking about here in customer interaction with the system, it's very different than turning a plant up and down. You can turn a pump and a motor up and down all day long, and you guys know that from the industry that you're in. And if it breaks, you can replace it. If we break the customer trust, that is very, very difficult and long time to repair. So it's very front of mind for us in terms of what that experience looks like.
Thank you. Do we have another presentation, or was Franco the last of the Northwest Energy Council?
That was the last what we prepared.
All right.
Any other questions, please? We'll make sure to put everyone's contacts in the chat, and happy to share these slides as well. And thanks.
Please do.
Thanks for the time.
Please,
Mark
please
Heizer
do.
with
Thank you for
Division.
coming in.
Just one quick one. I think it may be ODOE. It's about storage, of renewables. I think I heard an article that we're getting our first pumped hydro system in the state recently, and wondered if you want, so it's not just a battery storage, but there are other ways to do offsetting of the loads. And I don't know whether Edith could respond to this or who might know about that, but I do know I heard an article on this just the other day. The first one's being opened or being permitted right now. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any details because it's not an area that I've been looking at. So I don't have any more than you. I don't have any more information than what you read in the article about pump storage. But I can say that one of the things that we will be looking at in the energy strategy is to kind of figure out what kind of a business as usual scenario might look like out to 2050 if we kind of go with existing technologies and existing kind of trends, right? And then we know that we're going to have to look at new technologies, and the big question really is how we get the last 10 to 15% of decarbonized power, because it gets pretty tricky to do it without any fossil fuel generation on the system, without that flexibility. And so Franco mentioned long duration storage batteries. Pumped hydro is one of the technologies that's talked about quite a bit. Offshore wind has a much higher capacity factor than a lot of other renewables, so there's a lot of talk of that. We have this new hydrogen hub that's being planned right now. So there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. Geothermal I haven't mentioned, but that's in the mix too. So I'm actually not answering your question and expanding it to make the point that this is a really good point. And I'm sorry I don't have any more information. We can follow up with you afterwards with more if that would be helpful. But pumped hydro is among the technologies that we're looking at as possibilities, and we'll have some working groups as we develop the energy strategy to kind of figure out how to assess sort of the cost and risk and uncertainty going forward of those technologies in the mix and how to productively think about it.
So, thank you. Mark, could you expand just a little bit what you're talking about with pumped storage or pumped hydro? What's that concept?
I can share I can share a little more too, Mark, to fill in.
I'll let Meredith go on this one, but it's really pumping water uphill when you have excess power, and then essentially letting it flow downhill to generate electricity when you need it most. So it's sort of a battery using
gravity.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a really old technology and used in a lot of areas, but there are two projects in the Northwest that are getting closer to being a reality. The Swan Lake one down in the Klamath area is the one that I think you probably read about. And then behind it in production is one up in Goldendale on the Washington side of the gorge. And it's kind of what's considered middle duration almost of how much it could store energy, because it can provide, with that kind of gravity when it falls, 10 to 12 hour stored power. So, leave it to Franco and others to figure out how that fits in. You got batteries 4 to 6 hours. Then you have, until you have long duration battery storage. Right now, you have this kind of middle opportunity like this pumped hydro and some others that meet that kind of profile. And then much longer energy storage. I think part of the hydrogen hub is PG, and others are actually looking at hydrogen to store energy for longer duration and other solutions like that. So it's a really exciting area, I think, of a lot of these emerging technologies.
Okay.
And maybe if Franco could explain a little bit, when they're at that peak of the curve, what they're spending for electricity on the open market when it's at that point, and what it means to us as consumers to try and reduce that a bit. So that's sort of the concept that kind of got glossed over a little bit. But
Yeah, happy to touch on that. The system conditions really drive the market prices. And so when we see wholesale market prices that are at their market cap, which is about $2,000 a megawatt hour, it's really driven by the ability to, or the inability to flow energy from where it's being generated to where it needs to go, or the availability of the energy itself. And so, if you're spending $2,000 a megawatt hour to serve 4,500 megawatts for 4 hours, you can do the math on that. It's multiple millions of dollars an hour. If we're able to shift 2%, 10%, 25% of that usage to times when those prices aren't at their peak, that's going to be a significant cost savings. And then it also helps with the impact of potential price increases, because as we're trying to match the cost to operate the system with the price that customers pay, there's a lag in that. And so the more that we can kind of forecast that and be able to mitigate that with our actions in terms of the way that we use energy, the better. We're also doing things in terms of, I call it, extra regional within the region, cooperation and collaboration. So we participate in the Western Energy Imbalance Market today, which is a 5-minute market that helps smooth out some of those pricing issues. So we're able to trade in that, sub-hourly into the 5-minute window. The next evolution of that is what we call the extended day ahead market. So doing the same thing that we're doing in those 5-minute increments, but doing it day ahead. So we're, again, being more planful and optimizing the resources across the region, Oregon, California, Idaho, Washington, et cetera. And we just announced our participation in that maybe 2 weeks ago, and we'll go live in that in 2026. So it takes a lot to get the technology and infrastructure in place to be able to operate in that. But I think I failed to mention it. I'll mention it now. This is a public-private partnership. It's a collaborative kind of everybody at the table approach to be able to get the outcomes that we're looking for. So definitely appreciate the question, because this isn't really about it is about price, but the price isn't the driver. The price is the kind of output of all of the actions that we're taking. And so if we can take the right actions upstream, then it will help mitigate the costs and the price impacts downstream.
All right. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you, Meredith, for putting this together, and appreciate it very much.
Thank you all. We'll share our information. Happy to continue the conversations. Thanks for the good questions.
Great day, everybody.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 5. We have no appeals for the meeting. There's no unfinished business for the meeting. And we have no new business for the meeting. So we're rapidly advancing to announcements. Item 9. Does anybody have any announcements for this board? Chair Heizer. Chief Heizer. Yes.
Chair Hansen, Mark Heizer with the division. Just one more reminder that with the rollout, we forgot to mention, yes, we are moving forward with the 2022 version of 90.1 with as the 2024 Oregon Energy Efficiency Specialty Code. That rulemaking is complete. July 1 is the starting date of availability of using that code. With December 1st, 2025, it will be the code. Just to point out that, and as a new baseline commercial code comes up, just another reminder that we might be looking at, or will be looking at, a commercial reach code. So that will be a future thing for our agenda. Just wanted to make sure that was noted, that coming soon to a theater near you. Thank you.
Does anybody else on the board have an announcement they would like to make? Significant milestone, anniversary? Okay. Hearing none. Welcome again, Tyrone. We look forward to your interaction with our board and contributing to us. We appreciate your time and everyone else's time who is on this call. There being no further business, this is your last chance to stop me, but there being no further business, the April 10th, 2024 Construction Industry Energy Board meeting is adjourned. We'll see you all on June 11th. Thank you.
Thank you.